We continue now at the top of Daf Kufya Tesam and Aleph and Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 119a. On the previous summit, the Gemara asked, how do we know that the Oel Moed was in Nov and Givon for 57 years? And the Gemara is in the middle of that calculation. The Gemara says there were 20 years when the Aron was in Kiryas Ye'arim. And the Gemara now continues, Dechsiv, as it's written, V'hayamim asher molach David al Yisrael mem shana. David HaMelech was king over Klal Yisrael for 40 years. Bechevron molach zayin shanim. In Chevron he was king for 7 years. That 7 years, we said on the previous summit, was part of the 20 years that we just mentioned. Uveshlomo ksiv, and then by Shlomo it's written, Vayachel livnoso b'shnas arba l'malchuso. He began to build the Beis HaMikdash in the 4th year of his kingship, and so therefore you have 20 years plus 33 years, because again, the 40 years that David HaMelech was king, 7 of those years were part of the 20, so you just add 33 years. 20 plus 33 is 53, and then you add the 4 years of Shlomo, that's a total of 57, and the Gemara concludes, Nishtairu l'Shilo. Now what remains now for Shiloh, how many years was the Oel Moed in Shiloh? Shlosh meos v'shivim, chaser achas, 369 years. Rashi explains, Dechsiv hayam asher molach lamed gimel shana, so again we're adding 33 years to the 20 years, Harein nun gimel, that's 53 years. V'arba shemolach Shlomo lefnei binyan habayis, then there's 4 years that Shlomo HaMelech was king before the Beis HaMikdash was built. V'osa shana shalmu arba meos u'shmonim li'yetzias Mitzrayim, and that year is the completion of the 480 years from when they left Mitzrayim, and so nishtayru l'Shilo shin samech tes. If you do the math, what remains for Shiloh is 369 years. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Bo and Nov v'Givon, when they came to Nov and Givon. So the Mishnah said that at that time bamos were permitted. And the Gemara says, Menahani Mili, from where do we know this? The Tanu Rabbanan, that the sages taught in a Braisa. Rashi explains, Menahani Mili Shaya Heter lebamos achar kedushas Shiloh mishacharva. How do we know that after Shiloh, when Shiloh was destroyed, there was a heter for the bamos? That's at the time of Nov and Givon. Nov and Givon was after the time of Shiloh. So again, Menahani Mili, from where do we know this? The Tanu Rabbanan, because the sages taught in a Braisa. The pasuk says, "Ki lo vasa marota el hamenucha v'el hanachala." You haven't yet come to the menucha and to the nachala. To the menucha, to the place of rest. To the nachala, to the place of inheritance. What do these refer to? El hamenucha zu Shiloh. Menucha refers to Shiloh, and nachala, inheritance, zu Yerushalayim. That refers to Yerushalayim. And lama chilkon. Why are they divided? Because it says "Ki lo basam arota el hamenucha v'el hanachala." It doesn't say them both together. Why are they divided up? Kedei lita in heter bein zelazeh. In order to say that between the time periods of Shiloh and Yerushalayim, there was bamos were permitted in that interim time period. And Rashi explains, Kilo vasam bimei Gilgal el hamenucha. It says you haven't yet come. It said that in the days of Gilgal, you haven't yet come to the menucha. V'lama chilkon hakasav lichtov eshneim. Why is the pasuk dividing them up? El hamenucha v'el hanachala. Again, litein heter bama bein zelazet. To say that there's a heter of bamos between the two of them. To hakra beheter bamos de Gilgal mishtoi. The pasuk is actually talking about the fact that bamos are permitted at Gilgal, which is where they first came when they entered Eretz Yisrael. V'kamar, and the pasuk is saying, Ad Masai ani omer lachem ish kol hayosher be'einav. Until when does this rule apply that a person can do whatever he wants? Meaning you can build bamos, you can build private altars. That is kilo vasam arot, because you haven't reached the menucha and the nachala. Avalo mishabasim, but once you reach menucha nachala, so that's not permitted. V'yein heter bein zulazu. Now, if there was no permission between menucha and nachala, lo havale lemichtav ela menucha, then it could have just simply written menucha. You haven't yet come to menucha. Once you get to menucha, once you get to Shiloh, bamos are not permitted. Umidachsiv nachala, from the fact that it then says nachala as well, shma mina, so we see from here, dahachi kamarlu, that he's saying to them as follows, achar kedushas hamenucha, after the sanctification of menucha, meaning after Shiloh, ta'achzru leheter harishon, you actually get to return to that first permission. Bamos are permitted. Ad boachem el hanachal, until you come to the nachala. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Reish Lakish le Reb Yochanan. Reish Lakish said to Reb Yochanan, the Bach puts in the words Ihachi over here. Ihachi, if so, Meiser Sheni, Nami listening, Meiser Sheni, that halacha should also be taught. And Rashi explains the question. Ihachi, if so, Teshas Heter Havoy, if it really is a period of Heter, meaning if the time when the Oel Moed was in Nov and Givon, that was a time when bamos were permitted, if that is the case, so Naisi Nami Meiser Sheni le Nov Givon, Meiser Sheni should have to be brought, should have to be be consumed in Nov and Givon. Shari Nestalku Kol Kedushas Shiloh, since the Kedush of Shiloh is no longer, therefore it should be brought to Nov and Givon. Umay tam lo tanan b'masnisin lo ochlo sham. Why doesn't the Mishnah say that it should be eaten over there? Rashi understands, according to the Mishnah, that the Meiser Sheni could be eaten anywhere at that time. Why is it that it doesn't say that it has to be eaten in Nov and Givon? That's how Rashi understands the question. And the Gemara continues, Amar Le, he said back to him, Rabbi Yochanan said back to Reish Lakish, Meiser Sham Sham me Aron Kayalfi. Meiser is learned from Aron through a Gzeira Shava of Sham Sham, and Kevon de Aron Lohave, since in Nov and Givon there was no Aron, Meiser Nami Lohave, so there wasn't any requirement in terms of Meiser Sheni to bring it again to Nov and Givon. Rashi explains Sham Sham, it says V'achaltem Sham, Inami Lifnei Hashem Elokecha B'makom Asher Yivchar L'shakin Shemo Sham. Either one of those psukim can be the Sham, that's by Meiser Sheni. Uva Aron Ksiv, and by the Aron it's written V'nasata Sham Esa Aron, so we make a Gzeira Shava. V'kevon de Aron Lohave, since there was no Aron, D'chol Yemei Nov V'givon Haya HaAron B'Kiryas Ye'arim. As we said earlier, all of the time of Nov and Givon, the Aron was in Kiryas Ye'arim, Chav Shana for 20 years. Over year David at Shenivna Habayis, then it was in the city of David until the Beis HaMikdash was built, and so therefore, again, that's the reason there's no requirement to bring it over there. And the Gemara continues, Ihachi, if so, Pesach v'Kodshim Nami, we should say the same thing by Karban Pesach and by other Kodshim, the Sham Sham me Aron Yalfi, they also are learned Sham Sham from Aron. The Kevon de Aron Lohave, since the Aron wasn't there, in Hunami Lohave, there should be no requirement by them as well. And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Lei said to him, Da Amar Loch HaMani, Rabbi Shimon, who is the author of our Mishnah? It is actually Rabbi Shimon, Di Amar Af Tzibor Lo Hikrivu El Pesach V'Chovos HaKavu El Henzman, that he says, Rabbi Shimon says, even the community, the only karbonos they would offer on the Bama Gedola were the Karban Pesach and the obligatory karbonos which had a set time, Aval Chovos She'ein Kavu El Henzman, but when it came to obligations with no set time, Hacha V'Hacha Lo Karav, those were not brought here or here, they were not brought during this time period on private Bamos or on the Bama Gedola, and so therefore, Meiser Behema, when it comes to Meiser Behema, Chovo Shein Kavu El Henzmanu, that is an example of an obligation that doesn't have a set time. Ve'iskish Meiser Dagon la Meiser Behema, and Meiser Dagon is compared, Meiser Dagon here referring to Meiser Sheni, is compared to Meiser Behema, and so therefore, just like Meiser Behema was not brought at that time, so too by Meiser Sheni, this halacha does not apply. Rashi explains Pesach v'Kodshim Nami. If you're going to say that the reason is because of the lack of the Aron, that should apply by Pesach and Kodshim as well. Deha v'achaltem sham behu nami ksiv. It says v'achaltem sham over there also, and so therefore it cannot be that the source is from Sham, because then the same halacha would apply by Pesach and Kodshim. And so the Gemara then instead answered Moni hachmas nisan. Who's the author of our Mishnah to Katani that it says in our Mishnah Meiser Sheni b'chol Ari Yisrael? Again, Rashi understands that in our Mishnah we have the girsa that Meiser Sheni can be eaten in b'chol Ari Yisrael, in all the cities of Yisrael. V'lo hayatzarech lavi and Sham. There's no requirement by Meiser Sheni specifically to bring it over there. The author of our Mishnah is Rabbi Shimon. It's Rabbi Shimon. The Amar Chovo Shein Kavua Lahem Zman. Rabbi Shimon says obligatory karbonos without a set time. Lo karvu b'nov v'givon. They were not offered in Nov and Givon at all. V'hainu b'chorus and Meiser Behema. What does that refer to? That refers to Bechor and Meiser Behema. Those are examples of Chovo Shein Kavua Lahem Zman. V'yolef Taima Keda Amran Le'el. And we learn out the reason earlier. Begilgul by Gilgul. V'kevan de Meiser Behema lo have hasam Meiser Dagon Nami lo boy lasui hasam. And since Meiser Behema wasn't over there, so Meiser Sheni also does not have to be brought there. The Iskish lahadadi, those are compared to one another. The Chsiv, because it's written Aser to Aser, it says Aser to Aser, comparing the two kinds of Meiser. Ve'amrinan b'shtei Meisers hakosim medaber b'Meseches b'choros. We say that the pasuk is talking about both kinds of Meisers. We say that in Meseches b'choros. And the Gemara continues and says, if this is the particular opinion of Rabbi Shimon, Michlal, that implies to Rabbi Yehuda Karev, that according to Rabbi Yehuda it is offered, meaning Meiser Behema is going to be offered. And the Gemara says, in yes, the Amar Ravada Bar Masna, because Ravada Bar Masna says, Meiser Sheni Meiser Behema, both Meiser Sheni and Meiser Behema, Nacholin b'Nov v'Givon l'divrei Rabbi Yehuda, they are eaten in Nov and Givon according to Rabbi Yehuda, because again, Rabbi Yehuda does include Meiser Behema by the Bama Gedola, and therefore, again, by Meiser Sheni as well, there's going to be a requirement that it be eaten in Nov and Givon. But the Gemara continues and asks, V'haboy, Bira, doesn't Meiser Sheni require Bira, which means it requires a temple, and not merely what qualifies as a tent? And the Gemara continues and answers, V'lav Tani Rav Yosef, but didn't Rav Yosef teach Shalosh Biros, saying there are three that qualify as Biros, Shiloh, V'Nov V'Givon, U'Beis Olamim, Shiloh, and Nov and Givon, and the Beis HaMikdash. And so you see Nov and Givon, they do qualify as Bira. And the Gemara continues, Hu Tani La, he taught it, meaning Rav Yosef taught this, V'Hu Amar Lan, he explained it, La'achilas Meiser Sheni, we're talking here about eating of Meiser Sheni, Ve'aliba de Rabbi Yehuda, and again we're following the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, there is a requirement that Meiser Sheni be eaten inside Nov and Givon. And Rashi explains, V'habo'inan Bira, isn't there a requirement of Bira, Dechsiv Lifnei Hashem Elokeichem, that we would learn from what's written in the Pasuk, Lifnei Hashem Elokeichem. And Rashi notes, Nov V'Givon Chada Chashiv La, that Nov and Givon are considered like one. That's why when we're saying that there are three that qualify as Bira, that would be Shiloh, and then Nov and Givon, that counts as one, and Beis Olamim, that's the Beis HaMikdash. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Bo'el Yerushalayim, when they came to Yerushalayim, the Mishnah said that again at that time, Bamos were no longer permitted. The Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, the sages taught in the Brisa, Kilo Bosam Arota El HaMenucha V'el HaNachalo, again, the same pasuk we quoted above, Menucha Zu Shiloh, and Nachala Zu Yerushalayim. Menucha is Shiloh, and Nachala is Yerushalayim. V'yomer, and it says in the pasuk, Hoysali Nachalosi Ka'aryeh Bayar, V'omer Ha'ayit Savua Nachalosi Li Ha'ayit Saviv La. These are all psukim that are in reference to Yerushalayim, showing that Yerushalayim is called Nachala. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, these are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon says, Menucha Zu Yerushalayim, the reverse. Menucha is Yerushalayim, and Nachala Zu Shiloh. Nachala is Shiloh. V'yomer, as it says in the pasuk, Zu Menuchasi Adayad Po Eshev Ki Visiyah. That's a reference to Yerushalayim, which is Menucha. V'yomer, and it also says, Ki Vachar Hashem B'Tzion Ivo LeMoshav Lo. It says it's the place that's a Moshav Lo, and again, that is a reference to the fact that Yerushalayim is considered to be Menucha. The Gemara says, B'shlam alaman damar menucha zu Shiloh. It makes sense if we say menucha is Shiloh. Hainu dichsiv ala menucha v'ala nachala. It's in the proper order. Menucha first, then nachala. First Shiloh, then Yerushalayim. Ela laman damar menucha zu Yerushalayim. But according to the one who says menucha is Yerushalayim, nachala zu Shiloh and nachala is Shiloh. El hanachala v'ala menucha mi boile. It should be in the reverse order. Nachala first, then menucha. The Gemara says, Hachi kamar. This is what it means to say lo mi boy menucha. We don't even need to say anything about menucha to lo matisa that you haven't reached. Ela afilu l'nachala nami lo matisa. You haven't even reached nachala. You haven't even reached Shiloh, again according to this interpretation. And the Gemara continues with other opinions. Tana devei Rabbi Yishmael, who was taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, zu v'zu Shiloh, both menucha and nachala refer to Shiloh. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai omer zu v'zu Yerushalayim. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai says they both refer to Yerushalayim. And the Gemara says b'shlam alaman damar menucha zu. I understand according to the one who says that menucha, and we will note that quoted from Yirmiyahu, Hoysali nachalosi, are clearly prophecies about Yerushalayim. That's the idea that nachala refers to Yerushalayim. And the pasuk of Zos menuchasei adayad, so there it says Kivachar Hashem B'Tzion, clearly Tzion talking about Yerushalayim, and it says Zos menuchasi, again a reference to the fact that Yerushalayim could be menucha. And Rashi explains Zu v'zu Shiloh, according to the opinion of Tana devei Rabbi Yishmael, they're both Shiloh. Ve'afilu hachi yesh heter basra. Nevertheless, there is a heter of Bamos after Shiloh, because Savar Kedusha Rishona Kitchel Ashaita V'lo Kitchel Asid Lovo, because he holds that the original Kedusha was Kadosh at that time, but not for the future. U'v'Kedushas Yerushalayim Gufa Svira Le Diyesh Achara Heter, and by Yerushalayim, the Kedusha of Yerushalayim itself, he holds that afterwards there's a heter Kedamrinan b'Megillah, that we say in Megillah, Shamati Shemakriven b'Beis Chonyo Bizman Hazeh. So even after Yerushalayim, there was a heter Bamos V'Kimnak Rabbi Yishmael. We say that's like Rabbi Yishmael. And then the opinion of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai that Zu v'Zu Yerushalayim, that both are Yerushalayim, ve'ad she'ibona habayis lo nesru habamos. According to that, until the Beis HaMikdash was built, Bamos were not forbidden, meaning even during the time of Shiloh. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Yud Tes Amid Beis.